Before introducing our speaker today, let me remind you of the events at the center in the coming days. On Friday, we have a lunchtime talk given by my colleagues from the philosophy department, Sven Ness, who is going to be talking about against optimization. So looking forward to Sven's talk. On Tuesday next week, Christopher Pincock is coming from OSU to be talking about explaining the success of models. It's part of the Feature Former Fellows series, but Chris will be coming directly since OSU isn't that far from Pittsburgh. So instead of giving the talk online, we'll have it in person. So you're all invited to join us for that talk. On Saturday and Sunday, we're organizing the first conference, the first workshop of the semester, Philosophy of Particle and High Energy Physics, FEP 2. Again, as I've said now 50 times, led by David right here. Now, our website is back online after now weeks fighting with the man, also called IT. And now you can actually find the program easily on the center's website. And you can also register if you plan to be coming for the event. We don't really require you to register, but registering is helpful to have a head count for planning a coffee and that kind of things. So if you plan to come over the weekend, please go to the center's website and register for the workshop. The program is also there. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce Alexandre Billon, who is a visiting fellow at the center this semester. So Alexandre got his PhD in France from the École Polytechnique. Which I guess for many of you does not mean a whole lot. It's a very French institution, but the École Polytechnique is a leading engineering school in France. He also spent time at the École Normale Supérieure in 2000. Where I also went, so I'm very proud. He was a postdoctoral fellow at the Institut Jean Nicot, and is now an associate professor at the Université de Lille in the north of France. He works in the philosophy of mind, philosophy of psychiatry, has interest in many topics, but including psychopathology. He has published in the best journals, Philosophy, Mind and Language, PPR, Ergo, Erkenntnis, Synthèse, Journal of Consciousness Studies, on a range of topics in the philosophy of mind and philosophy of psychiatry. And today he will be talking about DDD, the philosophical takeaway. Alexandre, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Edouard, and thanks the Center for welcoming us and welcoming me. So today I'm going to talk about two mental disorders on which I've been working for 12 years. So 12 years is a lot, and I thought this lunch talk would a good opportunity to step back a little bit and to see where all that leads me, and maybe to see whether I can make a book out of all that. The two disorders I'm going to talk about are Depersonalization-Derealization Disorder. It used to be called depersonalization. It's a bit more simple. And I'll talk also a bit about Cotard syndrome, because it seems to be some kind of a delusional form of depersonalization. So I think the best thing is to start with two quotes from patients. So here is a recent quote of a patient from Sierra. Maurizio Sierra was a psychiatrist at Cambridge. So one of his patients, I feel some degrees of out of it all the time. I can sit looking at my foot and my hand and not feel like they are mine. This can happen when I'm writing. My hand is just writing, but I'm not telling it to. It almost feels like I have died, but no one has sought to tell me. So I'm left living in a shell that I don't recognize anymore. Here is another quote, much older. In fact, the condition was studied a lot in France at the turn of the 20th century by people who were great psychologists, such as Janet. Janet is very important in the history of psychology. So here's one of the patients. It was as if it was not me walking, it was not me talking, as if it was not me living. I can look at me, I am somehow bothered by my body, as if it wasn't me, as if I lived on the side of my body, on the side of myself, if you want. I don't know how to explain. So many times patients seem to have difficulties explaining what they feel, and they try hard, and they become quite philosophical, in fact. Okay. So just a little history of the disorder. So we've got the first clinical observation of the disorder at the beginning of the 19th century. Some of them are gathered by Esquirol in 1838. And the first systematic study was from an Austrian-born ENT doctor, Chris Chabert, who published a whole book with something like 30 case studies. And very quickly, it was theorized by philosophers, psychologists. At that time, many of the so-called psychologists were, in fact, just philosophers, such as Ribot, Janet. Janet was a philosopher and a medical doctor. Dugas, a philosopher, and Oesterreich in Germany, who I think was a genuine psychologist, or I'm not sure, in fact. So, very interestingly, very quickly, many philosophers used the condition to make arguments in philosophy of mind. And so, for example, in Bergson, Dilthey, James, and Sartre, well, we see depersonalization invoked explicitly in Bergson, Dilthey, and James, implicitly in Sartre, to make some claims about what it is to see something as being real. And Ribot, Théodule Ribot, Dilthey, Janet, Merleau-Ponty used it in order to investigate our normal self-awareness, because self-awareness seems to be distorted in such cases. Oops. So this is Ludovic Dugas. He's a forgotten philosopher, so he's only remembered for the fact that he coined the term depersonalization. In fact, he was a very interesting philosopher. He wrote a lot of interesting stuff in philosophy of psychiatry, or in philosophy of mind informed by philosophy of psychiatry. And he coined the term depersonalization. The term already appeared in the writings of a Swiss French-speaking diarist called Amiel, who used the term to describe his own condition. It was in fact arguably some depersonalization. He used the term in that sense. So because of many bodily complaints, even the quotes I gave you, some say, I feel like on the side of my body, or my body bothers me. The first clinicians suspected some kind of general anesthesia. However, patients proved to have normal sensory motor abilities. Then people say, okay, there are normal sensory motor abilities, maybe some other senses, neglected senses, such as interoception, are abnormal. That was the hypothesis of Ribot and of many people. Many people still today believe that there is an interoceptive problem. However, we haven't managed to find any interoceptive problems through experiments. And they also have a normal executive functioning. Their rationality is normal. Their attention is roughly normal. And okay. And it's often accompanied by high anxiety and depression and hyperreflexivity. Okay. It would affect 1 or 2% of the population. However, many people have experienced fleeting, short-lived, depersonalization-like experiences. It can happen in distressing situations. If you take serotonin-energic drugs like cannabis or LSD, that's a common side effect. It can also happen during meditation, and there are reports of meditation training, like yielding not only depersonalization-like experience, but sometimes real depersonalization episode. So DD-like experiences are also common in schizophrenia and severe depression. What is the cause? Well, it's often triggered by severe stress. You can often find it with PTSD, for example. It often happens in depression, and serotonin drug use can also trigger real depersonalization. Okay. So there has been ethnographic debates about whether it's a genuine syndrome. I think that shouldn't be a debate anymore. There have been large studies on cohorts of more than 200, more than 400 patients. But there are still debates on whether it's so specific or whether it's discrete. When people ask whether it's specific, they wonder whether it's not something like anxiety that can be found in many disorders, but that is not a specific syndrome. And whether it's discrete, it's the question whether it's might not be part of another condition. So, for example, there's a German psychiatrist who believes that depersonalization is always a prodrome of schizophrenia. Again, I think he's been proven wrong by experimental data, but there are still debates. In any case, in my talk, I will only rely on the first claim that it's a genuine syndrome, and which is that the symptoms of depersonalization disorder co-occur in a reliable manner. Okay, so sorry. Okay, what about Cotard syndrome? Cotard syndrome is often more famous because it's very spectacular. So Cotard syndrome involves a variety of negating or nihilistic delusions, such as the delusion that one's organs are lacking or rotting, that one is dead, that one does not sing, that one does not exist, that the world does not exist. It's called nihilistic delusions, délire de négation, because passions strikingly use the negative form all the time to deny that they have things, that the things are real. So this is Jules Cotard. He was a private doctor, neurologist at the end of the 19th century. He inspired, there's an eponym character in Proust's Recherche du temps perdu, who is inspired by this one. He makes fun of him a lot. Okay, and he made the first systematic observation of the disorder. He published a couple of articles in between 1880 and 1887, and he so the name of the disorder was given after him. So here are a few quotes. The first one is from one of the first observations. It was a patient from Fauville, a guy who had done the battle, a soldier of the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleonic soldier, who had been wounded by a cannonball. And so the doctor, Fauville, tell him, so how are you? So you ask how is the Père Lambert, but the Père Lambert, that was his name, is not there anymore. This is a machine made to his resemblance. It's not working properly. Please change it. Okay. A later patient, when I like this quote because this patient, she was named Laetitia. She's very, you can tell that she's very rational and she's just trying to understand what's happening to her. So she said, when I reflect on my situation, I cannot understand it at all. Either I'm alive or I'm not alive, but I cannot be dead as my heart beats. But I'm not alive as my person, me, myself, has disappeared. I feel like not being someone, and nevertheless, I talk. Am I stupid? I'm a body without a soul. It's more complicated than the Holy Trinity. Okay, so she understands that there's something very weird and hard to understand, but she tries hard. And I mean, when you read this verbatim, you don't feel like you're in front of someone who has lost his reason. Okay, so Cotard delusion seems to be the delusional version of depersonalization-derealization disorder. Why? Well, because what DDD passion says seems to be the same thing as what Cotard passion says, but prefaced by as if. It's as if I was dead. It feels like I'm dead, or I have the impression of being dead. And at least in Cotard, it's been recognized that there were delusional and non-delusional forms that were very closely connected. So what is, to be know a bit more about DDD, what is the structure of the symptom? I've given you some verbatims. If we look at the ICD-10, because this is a European or World Health Organization version of the DSM, we have this thing: the patient complains spontaneously that his or her mental activity, body, and surrounding are changing their quality so as to be unreal, remote, or automatized. Among the varied phenomena of the syndrome, patients complain most frequently of loss of emotions and feeling of estrangement or detachment from their thinking, their body, of the real world. So this is, there are many things here. Similar description in the DSM, except the new version is a bit more precise. It distinguishes depersonalization, which is roughly unreality of self, and derealization, which is unreality of external world. But it has many things. I think we can have, this is a bit a complex equation, but I think it really reflects what we have. So depersonalization is unreality or alienation of mental states, body, alienation or lack of agency, and impression of death or inexistence. de-emotionalization, it's impression of lack or unreality of emotion. That's a common complaint. That's why it's very quickly been considered as an affective disorder. Derealization, impression of unreality of the outer world, and something that is not often noted. In fact, it's been added to the DSM-5. Impression of atemporality, as if there were no present time, no distinction between past and future, or as if temporal distances were distorted. So I think it's interesting to get a. Well, this is a study by Simeon and colleagues that have run an explanatory factor analysis on various aspects of the symptom. I think it kind of corroborates what I just said before, except they had something which is interesting, which is perceptual alterations. We might talk about it a bit later. So just to give you a couple of more quotes, dementalization. I have no interest in what I appear to be feeling. It's someone else who feels mechanically. Laetitia, the patient of Janet, again, it was not genuine pain. It was a pain that did not reach the soul. It's a pain, if you want, but the surface of my skin is miles away from my brain, and I do not know whether I'm suffering. Janet pinched her, and she withdrew her hand, and so he said, so you had pain. And then she explained this. It was not a genuine pain. No, my body actually had pains. Sierra and Biarritz, when a part of my body hurts, I feel so detached from the pain that it feels as if it was somebody else's pain. So you've got all those were dementalization for emotions and algedonic states. You have also the same kind of thing for states that are not really balanced. So here a patient of Sierra say, my eyes see, but the sensation of what I see is completely absent. Often they complain that they cannot imagine things anymore, or they cannot remember things, but objectively, their imaginative and memory capacities seem to be intact. Desomatization and de-agentivity, parts of my body feel as if they didn't belong to me. It's not me who acts, I see myself acting, I'm a puppet. I am surprised by the precision of the automaton. This one was a depersonalized patient one. Janet called her depersonalized, but at that time there was no real distinction between quota and depersonalization, and so many clinicians were not as interested as we are between the difference between delusional and non-delusional patients, especially because in some patients we can wax and wane and be more intense and suddenly. In existence and death impression, I don't feel alive in any way whatsoever. I doubted my own existence, and at time even disbelieved it. So that's interesting. It seems to be denying Gito. Derealization. I'm gonna skip it and go. Oh yeah, just funny thing. Passions, in order to explain the unreality of the world, passions often say that the world seems to be like another world, very distant, very far away. Leroy used to talk of cosmic isolation. Some compare the world to a theater, as we're seeing. That's a passion of Dugas. Today, many passions refer to virtual reality or the Matrix. So here is a patient who seems to be experiencing derealization without depersonalization. So from my experience, it feels like I'm struck in virtual reality, similar later. I know it's me. I know my thoughts and actions are my own, but my surroundings don't seem to be real. I imagine it's a bit like what Neo feels when he goes back into the Matrix after being freed. And detemporalization, something that has not been well studied, but that is interesting also for time consciousness. I think about all of them at once, past, present, and future. Or again, I feel like the I, for lack of a better term, is now somehow situated across many moments. My identity is scattered everywhere, as if I'm everyone and everything and the spaces between things. Okay, it's a bit difficult to interpret. Okay, so that was a really descriptive description of the disorder. Now, I'd like to go on the philosophy of depersonalization, or at least what seems to be the philosophical conclusions that we can draw from it. And as I told you, as soon as the disorder was discovered, it was taken up by philosophers who were often psychologists. There was no diploma in psychology at that time. And Ribot, Théodule Ribot, again, an important French philosopher who had a lot of exchange with James, influenced each other. He had a very similar theory of emotions at roughly the same time. He also had a tremendous influence on Proust, with this idea that we have tiny hidden bodily impressions that make our phenomenology much more rich than we might think. And so Ribot used it to argue in 1883 that the sense of the self is grounded in affectivity, and that the self is something affective. Dilthey, at the same time, used it to argue that the sense of the self depends on the sense of reality, as Kant has taught us, he thought, and that the latter is a sense of resistance. So it was a common idea that to know whether something is real, I check and see whether it resists. And Dilthey endorsed this claim. But as many people at that time, Ribot is a bit an exception. Dilthey knew very little about the condition, and he just said, "Oh, there is this condition that confirms exactly what I've said," but he doesn't tell us why. In fact, it doesn't confirm at all what he says, because they have an intact sense of resistance, for example, and their sense of the self does not seem to depend on their sense of reality, as both can be distorted independently. James, in 1890, he also knew more than Dilthey about disorder. He argued it to say that the sense of reality is affective, and he linked it to the sense of interesting. And Bergson, who also knew little about the disorder, used it to argue that the sense of reality is a sense of the temporally present, which reduced to something like the sense of affordance, the sense that I can act on things around me. Okay, so that's a big list, and I think all the things I say are quite interesting, but very few are knew well about the disorder, except Ribot and James, for example. Those don't know much. And okay, I'm going to cut those ones because that's enough. So in a couple of articles, I've tried to argue that Ribot, James, Bergson were not totally correct, but still we can learn many interesting philosophical lessons from the study of DDD, and that it can help us settle perennial disputes about, for example, the nature of the cogito intuition, the intuition that I'm absolutely certain, I can be absolutely certain that I think can exist. The nature of basic self-awareness. Basic self-awareness is the kind of awareness that is reflected by our use of the first person. The nature, in the sense of bodily ownership, the sense that this arm is mine, the nature, scope, and function of mindness, some aspects of experience whose existence is debated that would tell us that my experiences are mine. The nature of the sense of reality and the nature of the sense of the present. The sense of the present is the kind of awareness that is reflected by our use of the indexical now. Okay. And I just want to give you an example of kind of argument, because they're all the same. It's the same argument schema that you can apply across the board. So let's take the cogito intuition. So the intuition that we can be absolutely certain that we think can exist. When you look in the literature about Descartes, but also about the certainties that we think can exist, you can distinguish two kinds of interpretation. The first two are rationalist, and they believe that this kind of certainty depends heavily on our rationality. And the other one is empiricist. It's rely on the idea that this certainty depends on some kind of acquaintance with our experience. And they are quite different interpretations. So here, Ayer, in an analysis paper of 1953, he said a bit complicatedly, but the sense in which the proposition "I think, therefore I exist" cannot be doubted is that either I think or I exist. If either is taken as the value of the variable p in the proposition function I dot that p, it follows that what I am dotting is true. In short, what makes cogito indivisible is just that it is truth follows from the fact that it is dotted, and the same applies to some. So here the idea is that it's absolutely certain because it's incorrigible. If I think it is true, I cannot think it falsely. Burge has an interpretation that might be in the same way. I think it's self-evidently self-verifying in that it does seem that understanding it suffices for knowing that it is true, and the relevant understanding requires no great perspicacity. So here's the idea again that I think is a bit like I write, I speak, I say something. I write will be true each time I write it, but not if I say it. I speak will be true if I say it, but not if I write it. And I think it's like a degenerate case. It will be true whether I think it, doubt it, imagine it, whatever. Another rationalist interpretation of the cogito, even more simple, it's like the indexical interpretation that you can find it in Kaplan, but it's been suggested by many other. The idea that I is cognitively equivalent to the thinker of this thought, and so I think is cognitively equivalent to the thinker of this thought think, and so it's a priori true. I don't think it's a good interpretation, and I don't think it's a priori true, but and the empiricist interpretation is also in many places. Here, Brandom evokes it to criticize it. Appearances are reified by Descartes as things that really are just the way they appear, in fact that we do not know them immediately by means of representation that introduce the possibility of misrepresenting. So on the one hand, it's just a trivial self-reflexive rationality, rational inference, and the other one is a form of acquaintance with experience. So I'm acquainted with my experience and myself through my experience, and this acquaintance yields absolute certainty. Okay, so what's the connection between this debate and depersonalization-derealization disorder? The connection is this, is that the rationalist interpretation makes some empirical prediction. It predicts that if someone fails to acknowledge that the certainty that he exists, he should have a rationality problem. And the empiricist interpretation predicts that if someone fails to be certain that he exists, he should have an experiential problem. Matter of rationality on the one hand, matter of experience. And the thing is that many patients with DDD seem to doubt the cogito. We've seen one who say, I doubted my own existence, and someone even disbelieved in it. And the thing is that they've been studied extensively and no one has ever found a rationality problem, but the consensus is that they have really abnormal experiences. They're reacting in a normal way to very strange experiences. And so I believe that because of that, DDD gives us an empirical reason to favor the empiricist interpretation. And in fact, once we know that, we can check the rationalist interpretation and see that they have many problems. Just to this one, for example, I got the thinker of these thoughts. In order to work, we have to know that this singular expression refers, which is what DDD patients explicitly doubt. Some of them say, I feel like there's no thinker of my thoughts. Sometimes I feel like there are many thinkers at the same time, and no one is me. And so this should not yield to certainty unless you are absolutely certain that your thoughts have one and only one thinker. And this seems to be a matter of experience. It seems that they have to feel in a certain way so that you are certain that they have one and only one thinker. Sorry. So, okay, so once this kind of argument can be generalized to many other topics, and importantly, for what I'll say below, I think it allows to favor also empiricists, but non-sensory views of basic self-awareness, the kind of awareness that underlies our use of the first person. Why? Well, because they have a problem of experience, but they have no sensory problem. In fact, they've been psychologists have tried to. They really believe that their perceptual abilities should be abnormal, but it's never been shown, and they seem to are able to do whatever you want them to do sport, do whatever shit, even when they have those strange impressions. I think it's also favors some empiricist views of the sense of reality, views that say that the sense of reality is grounded on experience. and empiricist views of the sense of the present. We say that the sense of the present is blended on some features of our experience. Okay. Each time the argument schema is the same. Different theories make different predictions in which about the situation in which this kind of self-awareness, reality awareness, present awareness might be disrupted. And DDD allows to show that the predictions of some of these theories are disconfirmed and the prediction of others are confirmed. Okay, so okay, so now I would like to. This is what I've done, and now I'm going to talk about what I would like to do, and I would like to try to move further in the philosophy of Depersonalization-Derealization Disorder and see where it can lead us. So I'd like to unify, generalize, and deepen my preceding works to give a sense of the problem underlying DDD and the philosophical lesson we can draw from it. And I also like to draw some experimental confirmation because we've got a lot of clinical observations on those things, but we have a few experimental confirmations done as far as the philosophical conclusions we can draw from DDD are concerned. So first, so I think it's quite uncontroversial that they have an abnormal basic self-awareness, sense of reality, and sense of the present. In fact, I forgot to mention it, but some of them say they feel like refraining from using the first person. And you might remember that some Cotard patients avoid the first person. De Lambert talk about himself in the third person. And this is a common observation across Cotard patients. It's called illusion. And we have the same kind of problems with the present tense. Some Cotard patients make grammatical errors. They use the past tense to talk about the present. And some DDD patients say they don't feel like the present exists anymore. We also have some case studies of Cotard patients who look at the clock with a lot of anxiety and trying to understand why the clock moves because they really feel like they're out of time or time has not passed. So I think it's quite uncontroversial that they have disorders of basic self-awareness, sense of the present, and sense of the reality. And so my question is there something common between those three forms of awareness? And my answer is that they are essential to what we call one normative subjective point of view on the world. Spontaneously, the world appears to be centered on myself. That's the first person perspective. On the present moment, that's the present tense perspective, and on the actual world, that's the modal indicative perspective. And I hypothesize that depersonalization involves fundamentally a distortion, disturbance of the subjective point of view, and that the patient's distorted sense of self, present, or reality is just a manifestation of this broader or maybe deeper distortion. That's my hypothesis. And second point, which I think is much more tricky, I like to show that the study of DDD allows one not only to argue for specific accounts of or awareness of the self, the present, and the real, but also to argue that those kinds of awareness are in fact correct. So that when we normally perceive ourselves as a subject that can use I, that when we normally perceive the present as being really a special moment distinguished from the past and the future, we see those things as correct. We see those things correctly. And so there would be here two ways to do it. Via negativa, which would consist in swatting the widespread debunking accounts of this form of awareness. So for example, some people would say, okay, it's true that I'm conscious of myself as a subject, but that can be explained away. You just need to master the indexical I to be able to be aware of yourself like that. So you should not be able to make any substantial conclusion from the fact that you are aware of yourself as an I. Or to put it another way, when I see a table, I can take my experience as face value to use it to argue that there is a table. When I'm aware of myself as a subject, I cannot likewise take my experience as face value to argue that I am a subject of experience or self, because in that case, we have a debunking theory of this kind of awareness. And the via positiva would be more radical. It would be consist in arguing that it is unlikely that we see things better when we suffer from depersonalization-Derealization disorder. Maybe because it's a disorder, it's a dysfunction of something. That's a bit tricky. I'm not sure it was, but I'll try to explain quickly how I intend to proceed to use this via positiva. So just to give you an example, the via negativa, so for the sense of time, I think it's one of the clearest examples. So the sense of the present seems to display the present time as intrinsically special. So as the a-theorist claim it is. In fact, a-theorist arguments for the intrinsic presentness of some moment rely on the phenomenology of the present and on something you can call phenomenal conservatism, which say that you should take your experience as face value when you want to know what time is. That experience is a good window and the nature of time. And B theorists, when they see those kind of arguments, they will either deny that one is true, so deny that we have an A-theory phenomenology, that deny that our phenomenology presents the present time as being intrinsically present, as opposed to present relative to me or relative to the February 11th. Or they will propose debunking arguments granting that the phenomenology of the present is really like the A-theorist pretends, but claiming that we can explain away this phenomenology. So, for example, Merleau argued that our sense of the present reduced to a capacity for situated cognition, which need not involve any grasp of an intrinsic present. You just need to be able to perceive things in context and to react appropriately to have this kind of phenomenology of the present. And okay, so so just for the sense of self, it's also interesting, the same kind of argument or basic self-awareness seems to present us as thinking, maybe super short-lived things, that is subjects of experience or minimal selves. Realists for the minimal selves, you haven't many in the analytic tradition, you've got some. Galen-Strawson is one. You have many in the phenomenological tradition, and they rely on the phenomenology, They say, well, I appear to be a self, and so I am a self. And so with phenomenology plus phenomenal conservatives, you got realism for some kind of minimal self. Anti-realists will respond either by denying that one is true. So no, the phenomenology is not like that. This is a Humean or neo-Humean answer, which deny that there's a phenomenology of minimal selfhood. And so others who grant that there might be a phenomenology of minimal selfhood will try to explain away this phenomenology. So, for example, many people inspired by Kaplan have tried to argue that this kind of phenomenology just depends on the mastery of the reflexive rule. Or you also have Perry and Mellor, who have argued for situated cognition accounts of basic self-awareness, who have other debunking accounts that are similar to the one used by Mellor in the case of present time awareness. So here is a famous quote by Kaplan, who tried to argue, to explain Frege's remark that everyone is presented to himself in a primitive and particular way, simply by the claim that it relies on the mastery of the reflexive rule, which say that any thought refers to the subject of this thought. Nothing special, no acquaintance with oneself. Yeah. And so I think that the study of DDD in each of those cases allows one to reject the denial strategy by confirming that there is a genuine phenomenology of the present, of the self, and of the real. Well, why? because passions complain that the lack of normality of the present, of the self and of the real. And they also claim that they lack something they used to have, but that they took for granted, that was obvious, so that was almost invisible because it was always there. And my claim is that by default, we should take those testimonies seriously and believe that there is indeed something in experience that is usually always there, and that can be described as a phenomenology of the present, of the self, or of the real. It also allows us to reject the debunking strategy. Why? Because DDD passions master the use of indexicals. In fact, when they don't want to use them, it's because they know the rule. They say, I feel like not using I because I feel like there is no subject of my soul, so that there are many subjects. And they also have an intact capacity for situated cognition. They can play tennis, they can do whatever you want. They have normal perceptual abilities and normal abilities to react on their perceptions, to act on their perception. Okay, so that was for the via negativa, you remember. So it was to claim that our normal sense of the present, self, and real are somehow correct, even when they seem to present the present as being intrinsically present, as the self being real, or as the world as being having something of like a real character that does not reduce to well, okay, a real character. The via positiva is a bit more tricky, but so I've tried to use it in a recent article on the problem of reality, so the sense of reality. But a rough version would be, well, these people are mad, they can't see things better than we do, right? This is very rough. You've seen example of such kind of arguments, not about DDD, but even though it's related to, so this is an anecdote. So for those of you who remember Descartes' second meditation, something we learned by heart in France when we were bachelor. So he tries to doubt the reality of the world, and he tries to doubt that his limbs are his. And suddenly he said, but on what grounds could I deny that his hand and his body are mine? If I deny that, if I try to doubt it by imagining that they're not mine, wouldn't I be like those madmen who steadily insist that they are jugs or have a glass body? An interesting point that has, as far as I know, not been noticed is that those were symptoms of Cotard syndrome at that time. The glass body is like empty body, nothing inside. And those people who said this hand is not me. So here is in fact rejecting the Cotard passions who deny the cogito, but that's the side thing. Okay, so rough version, DDD passions have mental disorders, so they cannot see better than we do. Okay, it's not great because the appeal to folly is just a dramatization of the appeal to common sense, and why should we trust common sense, right? And there is a long tradition of picturing folly as a kind of insight, dates back at least to Plato's divine delusion. You also have that in the New Testament in Freud. And many philosophers, maybe most of them, seem to agree with DDD passions. So Humean, Buddhist, and their uncountable hearers insist on the unreality of the self. Merleau and other B theorists believe that the present had nothing special. It's just a place where we happen to be. If you remember Sartre's Novia, it's just Sartre's Novia is just a story of a historian who goes to a small town in France and starts suffering from depersonalization-Derealization disorder. And the funny thing is that for Sartre, it gives him a clear insight on what is existence. That is nothing interesting, it's filthy, it's nothing else. And there is this, it's funny to see how the passions of DDD passions can sometimes look like the thesis of philosophers. This was witnessed very early by Janet, a French psychologist, who in 1909 said, when one has seen many of these DDD passions, one comes to sadly wondering whether philosophical speculation is a disease of the human mind. And Alquier, Descartes scholars who I think all French know, who but he's probably not known much elsewhere. He was also a teacher of Deleuze and Derrida, and so he was quite an influential figure. He's worked a bit on derealization. Well, he used it at least as a metaphor, and he argues that metaphysics has always seemed to be in one way or another an endeavor of derealization. So maybe those passions are right, after all, if all philosophers think they are. So I'd like to put, soon finish, I'd like to put forward a more sophisticated version of the via positiva, which rely roughly on the idea that we're finely tuned and that a disorder has little chances of making us better at anything interesting. So mental disorder are dysfunction. DDD involves the dysfunction of awareness, and especially of awareness of the self-present reality. It's extremely unlikely that the dysfunction of awareness makes the latter most truthful about the self-present real. It could only be the case if the self-present reality awareness had the function to hide us the horrendous truth about the self-present real world, which I guess is implausible. I mean, the only case where a dysfunction gives you better awareness is when the proper function of the thing is to hide you something. It might be a weird idea in that case, even though Schopenhauer suggests something along those lines. We have this sense that we're individual things that exist, real selves, but in fact, it's just an illusion that is designed to save the species, because otherwise we would stop doing anything and we would become Buddhist, hidden in retreats and stop reproducing. Okay, but I think that there is in fact a good and convincing theory of the biological underpinnings of depersonalization-Derealization disorder, and it does not support that its function is to hide us something. This theory, very roughly, I don't have much time, but it's the idea that in some conditions, it might be useful to feel detached from oneself, especially in very stressful or traumatic conditions when there's not much I can do. Being detached from myself might allow me to escape PTSD afterwards, to have less traumatic memories. It might allow me also to maybe to avoid panic attacks and heart attacks or things that could be triggered by that. And the idea is that, so we have an escape button, and in DDD, it's just that the escape button is blocked. So the dysfunction is that the escape button should work just for a few minutes, and it gets blocked. That's the biological theory of DDD. Okay, so now the take-home message, at which I promised a philosophical takeaway message. So if I were right, DDD and Cotard syndrome will be disorder of the subjective point of view. Their study might allow us to vindicate not only certain theories of the sense of aware of the self, the present, and the real, but also the accuracy of these senses, these forms of awareness. And if we generalize, it could allow us, in fact, to argue for some theories of the subjective point of view rather than others, and to argue for the accuracy of the subjective point of view. Philosophy have always tried to discount the subjective point of view most of the time in favor of more objective point of view. Maybe, and that's what I like to try to suggest, the subjective point of view is not that bad and should be taken more seriously. So first, what does it tell us about the subjective perspective? It tells us that the subjective perspective does not reduce to something like that, because DDD patients do have that. They can see the things center on themselves and they can react on this very adequately, but still they miss something. And so the subjective point of view is not a mere spatial or sensory motor center. And maybe also we should take more seriously our subjective intuitions. It's been noted by many philosophers that some philosophical intuitions heavily depend on the point of view adopted. So for example, in the case of dualism, it seems that if you adopt a third person point of view, you will be attracted to materialism more than if you take seriously the first person perspective. And same for personal identity. from a third person point of view, you are likely to, if you favor the third person point of view, you are likely to be a reductionist about the personal identity. If you favor the subjective point of view, you're more likely to be partisan of the further fact view, the thing that there's something more than bodily continuity and personal memories or psychological continuity to personal identity. And there are many other debates, but that have been argued. So the take-home message, I don't want to outlast, is that DDD is a disorder of the subjective point of view. The latter is not just anterior, but involves structural aspects of experience that are normally always there, that tell us that our experience are mine, that my experience are mine, that are occurring now in the real world. And the third conclusion is that the subjective point of view might be more reliable in philosophy than we ordinarily think. Okay, thanks a lot.
We have plenty of time for questions.